Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea is set to raise its minimum wage for next year by more than 5% to a little over 9,000 won an hour. That's around $8, though still shy of the Moon administration's pledge of 10,000 won. The Delta variant of the coronavirus is making up a growing portion of South Korea's fourth wave of the virus. Daily cases are rising outside of the Seoul area, with officials to revisit the distancing measures there this Wednesday. And South Korea lodges a strong complaint with Japan over the Japanese Defense Ministry repeating its false claim to South Korea's eastern island of Dokdo. The claim was repeated in Tokyo's latest defense white paper. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea is set to raise its minimum wage for the year 2022 by more than 5% from this year's level. It's going to be at 9,160 won per hour, which currently is right out $8 an hour. The Minimum Wage Commission said its decision took into account economic forecasts as well as the pandemic's effects on businesses. If it gets final approval next month, it'll take effect in January. Jang Tae-hyun reports.
Next year's hourly minimum wage in South Korea has been set at 9,160 won, roughly $8. It's a 5.1% increase on year. The Minimum Wage Commission on Monday announced its decision. The labor side had been calling for a sharp increase from this year's 8,720 won, around $7.6, but the management side wouldn't budge. The amount of increase has been set based on the country's economic projection, following the Bank of Korea's forecast that the South Korean economy will grow 4% this year. The labor minister will publicly announce the new minimum wage by early August, and it will take effect from January 1st, 2022. Both labor and management can object by requesting a re-evaluation, although this has never happened since the system was introduced. Experts say the final minimum wage was decided considering the situation of both business owners and laborers. With the increased minimum wage, more than 3.5 million people will see their paychecks rise from the turn of the year. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in is going to chair a strategy meeting this Wednesday on the Korean New Deal initiative to mark a year since the government first unveiled the plan. Under the theme, A Country That Makes the Future, South Korea. President Moon will give a keynote speech on the vision going forward, while the finance minister will announce detailed policies. The initiative was launched in July 2020 as a means to transform the country into a pace setter and to overcome COVID-19, embracing two main pillars, digital and green. It calls for investments of over $130 billion by 2025 to create some 1.9 million jobs. The Blue House says the number of participants in Wednesday's meeting will be reduced in accordance with virus prevention measures. Efforts are now underway in earnest for South Korea to host the 2030 World Expo in Busan. It submitted its bidding application last month, and today the country launched a bidding committee, which will follow through on the bid. At the committee's inaugural meeting Tuesday in Busan, the former chairman of the Korea International Trade Association, Kim Young-ju, was officially appointed as the head of the committee, and 78 others were named as committee members. The meeting was attended also by Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum, who said a task force will be formed next month to support the committee and its bid. The World Expo is one of the three most high-profile global events, along with the Olympics and the World Cup. So far, only 6 countries have hosted all 3 events, and Seoul will join them if it wins the bid. The host city of the 2030 World Expo will be announced by the end of next year. The global lifestyle and current affairs magazine Monocle has named Seoul one of the world's most livable cities, ranking it 11th. Monocle's been publishing its most livable cities list every year since 2009, and this is the first time Seoul has made the top 20. It cited Seoul's high quality of life even through the pandemic, also praising the city's cheap and commuter-friendly transport system and its wide variety of entertainment. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good afternoon. Thank you for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with the markets. Stocks on Wall Street overnight rose to new record highs as investors look ahead to earnings for the second quarter, which will start coming out on Tuesday. Expectations that there will be a massive increase in earnings from a year ago, now that the American economy is pretty much open. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, U.S. market showed continued rise and has hit the benchmark record for three major indexes. If you look at the Dow Jones, it added 126 points, up about 0.4%. S&P 500 gained 0.4% as well to 4,385. And NASDAQ was up also by 0.2%, hitting 14,733. Now, if you look at these rising trend, this is due to the expected earnings season. We are going to have some of the bank earnings starting sometime this week, starting the 14th of July. JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs and all major banks will be all releasing the data, which will be showing what's happening to the economic conditions and whether or not interest rate environment should be further rising in the future or to fall. Basically, a lot of data will be coming out to show whether or not U.S. economic recovery will be a long-term case or short-lived. Also, the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell will be also appearing before the Congress on Wednesday and Thursday in regards to show what he feels about the inflationary pressure of the current market. All in all, we get the feeling that the U.S. economy will be entering a Goldilocks period where the inflationary pressure will be quite reasonable, as well as economic growth rate will be fairly reasonable. If you look at from the 2009 to 2020, when there was a very long period of the equity market rise, when we call that phase as Goldilocks phase, right before the COVID-19 case hit, we did see 2% inflation and 2% economic growth every year for a very long period of time, which resulted into quite significant rise of the U.S. market. We think that we will at least have next 2 to 3 years of very similar period when we see the economic growth rate inflation will be fairly reasonably good. And if that's the case, then U.S. market would continue rise. And the second quarter earnings should be fairly supportive of the economic growth rate as well as the equity market rise. So we are expecting that the trigger point for the further rise of U.S. market would be the second quarter results. And that should also trigger point most of the other economies as well as the other equity market to further rise in the future.
Well, a Goldilocks scenario would contrast very nicely with a lot of the doom and gloom that's out there in the news these days. But looking at that gain on Wall Street, it seems to have spilled over into Korea. Another gain similar to yesterday's here. The Kospi trying to climb back to that 3,300 level where it was a week ago. Tell us about the domestic market.
Right. If you look at the Korean market, it kind of overreacted to the case where the U.S. interest rate falling to 1.25%. And Korea, we're talking about possibility of earnings picking or the economic growth rate picking, therefore sell into the news of the record high of U.S. market. But that decline was fairly limited. From the peak to bottom, it fell by about 3.8%, now recovering quite nicely back up. Yesterday's session, it was up about 0.9%. Today's session is up another 0.8%. We're not to the record high level yet, but quite reasonably recovering nicely. And it seems that that trend is continuing for the Kosdaq as well. Now, also, meanwhile, First Finance Minister Lee said that government will beef up the monitoring of the financial risk as the global economic recovery could be slowing. That's what he's saying. And I think that kind of triggered most of the people are uncertain about the overall economic conditions. But I must say that the Korea's economic condition is reasonably strong, except the domestic consumption portion because of the high level of debt to consumer debt level as a percentage of GDP. But nevertheless, Korea is very dependent on export, and export numbers are very strong. It rose again by 14.1% in the first 10 days of July, which is, quite significantly strong relative to the July number of last year was very strong as well, post COVID-19. So it seems that the genuine growth is happening in terms of export, and it's due to the global economic recovery and global economic growth rate. Now, if you look at robust demand areas, the chips, the oils, and petrochemical products, all these are showing very strong growth rate. And if that's the case, we think that Korea is in a very good shoes for the further rise in the future.
And speaking of oil and petrochemicals, another price to look at today is oil, also gold. Both of them are down. Oil because of concerns about the virus hitting the economy again globally. Also, the OPEC countries unable to reach a new deal to limit supplies. In the case of gold, it's down, but you have to wonder what the inflation numbers this week will look like. What can you say about gold and oil, Mr. Yu?
Yes, the oil price were rising quite fast pace because of the supply control. Demand is picking up, but not to the significant level relative to the 2018 period. And if you look at the rig counts of the U.S., it is only half of what used to be at 2018 peak of the oil price. So clearly the U.S. as well as OPEC Plus are controlling the supply very aggressively. That has resulted into a higher oil price environment. So if there's any kind of news that these kind of negotiations are not happening correctly or reasonably to limit the supply, then obviously oil price will fall due to the high supply coming through. We think that oil price is not going to be further rise from the current level. We think that the shale gas companies of U.S. makes reasonably good return with the current oil price being around $70 to $75 range. We think that should be the range-bound period that will be happening over the next at least 1 year or so. In terms of the gold, obviously it is looking at as a safe asset. We do see continuation of the M1 growth rate happening in U.S. and global scale. And now China is also thinking about, raising the money supply growth rate through the cutting the reserve ratios. So all that means is that alternative asset interest would continue to remain very strong. And the gold would be the one of the alternative assets that people will be interested. However, though, we think that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as well as silver are more in favor than the gold. So therefore, even though we do think the gold price is expected to further rise, we should be looking at more of other alternative asset class.
Well, and speaking of money supply, today the Bank of Korea released data on that subject, and from a year ago we see M2 was up 11%. Lots of loans taken out. There are concerns that this will keep sending prices higher. But tell us about this report from the BOK and what it might say about the economy.
Well, I think that the M2 growth rate needs to be picking up even further because we did see a very weak domestic consumption era, because if you look at the consumer debt level as being very high, we do think that the continuation of support of liquidity is expected. If you calculate the M1 divided by M2 ratios, we did see that the debt ratio being very high in terms of record number, which means that even though BOK and money supply growth rate is extremely high on the printing side or actual supply, in terms of the M2 growth rate, it's much lower than what of the M1 growth rate, which means that the velocity of money is low, and we we would like to see that number further rise. So we don't think that this M2 growth rate is going to fall further in the future. We think that it might further rise. If you just look at on a month-on-month basis, it's up only 0.6%. If you annualize that, that's less than 8%. We think that that number is not strong enough. We think that domestic liquidity condition should be further improved because if you look at the domestic condition-wise, consumer debt areas and the also COVID-19 impact to the small mid-cap companies and the mom-pop shops, which is going to be quite negative. So we do think that the BOK is not going to be in any shoes to cut interest rate anytime soon. We don't think that that action will happen until next year.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us, as always.
Thank you very much.
South Korea has had more than 1,000 coronavirus cases every day now for a week, and people are traveling throughout the country for their summer vacations, so the situation could get worse. Also, a growing proportion of the new cases are of the more contagious Delta variant. Han Sung-woo has the details.
Over 1,000 daily infections for one straight week. South Korea's fourth wave isn't showing any signs of letting up. On Tuesday, the nation reported 1,150 new cases of COVID-19, 50 more than the day before, and the most ever for a Tuesday. 1,097 of the cases were locally transmitted, with just under 800 coming from Seoul and the surrounding area. As vacation season approaches, the proportion of infections from outside the capital region has increased from about 22% late last week to now almost 28%. This comes as officials also reported 536 new cases of the four main variants between July 4th and the 10th, bringing the total to 3,353. Out of the new infections, 374, or nearly 70%, are of the Delta variant, feared to become the dominant strain in the country. In response, authorities have come up with a new PCR screening method that will allow local governments to detect the particular variant and also keep better track of the spread of mutant strains in general. It will be trialed for 2 weeks starting this Thursday. As for so-called breakthrough infections after vaccination, the government reported that the corresponding vaccine for 143 out of the 252 total suspected cases were Janssen's, but added that the phenomenon itself is very rare and can happen across all vaccines. The government also pleaded with younger people to stick to safety protocols, saying data shows many recent infections have come through people socializing.
In this current fourth wave, infections from contact between different generations have greatly decreased. Instead, standing out now across all ages are infections from contact within each age group.
With the 2-week transitional period for the country's new 4-tier social distancing scheme now coming to an end, Korea will announce on Wednesday how regions outside the capital area will each adjust their prevention measures to tackle the current resurgence. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
And South Korea has started another round of COVID-19 vaccinations, this one for teachers and other people taking care of young children, also workers at facilities in the Seoul area deemed high risk. This round is starting 2 weeks sooner than planned thanks to the vaccine swap deal with Israel. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Vaccinations began on Tuesday for teachers and staff members who take care of children at daycare centers, kindergartens, and the first and second grades of elementary school. Vaccinations will also be expanded to places deemed high-risk facilities by the local governments of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province. These include cram school teachers and transit and postal workers. Shots of the Pfizer vaccine for an estimated 340,000 people are being administered over the next 2 weeks in 43 areas across the capital city and 51 areas in Gyeonggi-do province. From July 26, the number of workers at high-risk facilities who are eligible for the vaccines will be expanded nationwide to 800,000 people. And by August 2nd, that target number increases further to nearly 1.9 million people. Teachers in charge of students in the third grade of elementary school and up to the third grade of middle school, as well as those employed at facilities taking care of children, can get their vaccinations between July 28th to August 7th. Reservations are to take place for 4 days between Wednesday and Saturday. Vaccinations for teachers in high schools as well as high school seniors are to take place next Monday through July 30th. The official tally for the number of people in South Korea who have received their first dose has surpassed 15.6 million, which is 30.4% of the population. The number of people who are fully vaccinated comprises 11.6% of the country's population. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, Japan unveiled its annual defense white paper on Tuesday, in which it repeats the false claim that the South Korean island of Dokdo is Japanese territory. The Korean government summoned Japanese officials to file a strong complaint. Yoon Jung-min reports.
South Korea has filed a strong complaint over Japan's repeated false territorial claims and called for an immediate retraction of such claims. This comes as Japan, in a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, unveiled its annual defense white paper, which for the 17th year in a row made false claims over South Korea's easternmost island of Dokdo. Seoul's foreign ministry pointed out that Japan has recently reinforced such claims.
The Korean government expresses strong regrets that the Japanese government has been recently intensifying its unjust claims over Dokdo, including through the recent defense white paper.
The ministry made clear that Dokdo belongs to South Korea historically, geographically, and by international law, and that it will sternly act against any provocations regarding the island. On Tuesday, South Korea's foreign ministry called in a senior diplomat from the Japanese embassy in Seoul, Hirohisa Soma, and filed a strong complaint. On the same day, Seoul's defense ministry summoned a military official from the Japanese embassy, Colonel Takashi Matsumoto, to protest against Japan's claims. The ministry expressed deep regrets and strongly called for an immediate correction over Tokyo unilaterally claiming that a South Korean warship directed fire control radar at a Japanese patrol aircraft in the East Sea in December 2018. In the paper, Japan claimed that South Korea is continuing its negative response when it comes to their relationship, citing heightened military tensions in the East Sea in 2018 and Seoul's defense drills on and around Dokdo. Tokyo strongly urged Seoul for what it calls proper response to resolve bilateral issues, citing their trilateral cooperation with the U.S. This comes ahead of the upcoming Tokyo Olympics this month, where South Korean President Moon Jae-in is likely to visit for talks with his Japanese counterpart. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The K-pop stars BTS have made it 7 weeks in a row now at #1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 with their hit single Butter. The band have been celebrating their success with fans online, and they're looking forward to their newest song, Permission to Dance, to debut on the Hot 100 next week. Kim Bo-kyung reports.
It's lucky 7 for BTS. The K-pop group's summer smash hit Butter has retained its position as #1 on Billboard's main singles chart for a 7th straight week. Billboard on Monday said that the song sold 108,800 downloads in the week ending July 8th and attracted 29.1 million radio airplay audience impressions. Experts say the increase in the number of radio airplay audience impressions shows the song is being recognized as mainstream music in the US.
Most people who listen to the radio nowadays aren't necessarily the people who are listening on streaming platforms. They're not diehard fans. So this shows, from my perspective, that the radio play growing means that the casual listener is listening to Butter more.
There have only been 54 songs to debut at #1 on the Hot 100 chart, and among them, Butter is just the 8th to have topped the chart for 7 weeks in a row. As far as groups go, BTS has achieved the longest #1 streak in the US since 1995. The last time was One Sweet Day by American singer-songwriter Mariah Carey and R&B group Boyz II Men, which stayed at #1 for an incredible 16 consecutive weeks. BTS shared their delight with their fans known as ARMY through their official Twitter, tweeting that they can't believe this is really happening. with the hashtag Pass the Baton and Permission to Dance. Permission to Dance is BTS's new single released on July 9th, a collaboration with British singer-songwriter Ed Sheeran.
The song has much more popular appeal because it can be enjoyed by all generations, compared to Butter, which was talking about a relationship between lovers.
With the popularity of BTS and Ed Sheeran in the US, some are even pondering if BTS could knock themselves off #1 spot with their new track. 김보경, 아리랑 뉴스.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.